So thank you everybody for having me here. I am out of Columbus, Ohio, and I spent a couple days in Indianapolis earlier this week, and it was so cold in Columbus. Like, this kind of feels like I'm at a tropical place. Has it been cold here? Yeah. Oh my God, I am so ready for spring. You know, how about you, right? Okay, so I am, as Molly said, a former journalist, and this is actually what I looked like back in the 80s with the Texas frosted hair and all. Who else? Is there any other former journalists in the audience? I love it. So I just, what I'm going to talk about today is brand journalism, and I really feel like that we all need to start kind of thinking of marketing and PR in a whole new way. And I think people that have journalism background, you're kind of ahead of the game. I'm not saying you have to be a journalist to do a great job with brand journalism, but you really need to kind of switch your thinking. So as Molly said, I do work with a lot of academic medical centers. I work with Ohio State University Medical Center, not necessarily as national. Okay, so I'm going to talk about national, and a lot of our hospitals too are also trying to increase volume, which I'm sure that you're trying to do as well. So I just want to try to help you apply it maybe at a little different level. So I just don't want you to say like, oh, we couldn't do that because we're not going to be talking to NBC News. Well, you might be talking to your local newspaper or your local NBC station. So I just want you to know that it definitely does apply. Also at your seat, so my whole presentation is on this flash drive, along with a white paper that I wrote, How to Be a Brand Journalist. So hopefully these are some resources that you can just take back with you and put some of this into practice. Okay, so let's get started. Let's just talk about storytelling. So why is now a great time to tell stories? Well, first of all, the news media has expanded coverage, but not their staff. Have any of you guys seen this in your local markets where all of a sudden, like, your favorite reporter is maybe gone? They've been there a long time, right? And they're no longer there, but yet they might have, more news to cover. They might now have to not only put news in the paper, they have to put it on the newspaper's Twitter feed, on their Facebook, on YouTube. So there is a lot more news that reporters have to cover, but they don't have as many people to do it. The second thing is technology has removed all these barriers for brands. Are many of you in the audience responsible for your hospital's social media, right? So you're pushing out content from there. So you can talk right to your audience. I'm sure you have lots more hats than just social media, right? Many more hats. And social media does allow us now direct access to our audience. And I really believe, so my company works probably like 90% in healthcare, but I feel like that all of us in healthcare, we're kind of ahead of the game when it comes to storytelling, because we actually have valid stories to tell. We have breakthroughs. We have stories of hope, of saving lives, and we have patients, these people that will help us tell our story. A lot of brands don't have that. People that are selling consumer goods, they don't have these great stories that we have. So I think we really, really need to appreciate it. We also have great experts that can give tips on a lot of different things. And I think the thing that we have the most is consumer interest, because let's face it, everybody gets sick. Nobody wants to get sick, but everyone gets sick. So we have stories that apply to a lot of people. So I would love to know, so does this kind of represent titles like maybe we have marketing folks, PR people, communication, digital? Anybody not in one of these categories? So everyone is. Okay, so I think what I want you guys to think about today is not that we all have different titles, but today we all have the same title. We are all brand journalists, okay? So even if you've never worked in a newsroom in your life, let's all pretend we're journalists, okay? All right, so the key tactic in storytelling is brand journalism. It's something that I have really been doing since I started my company 17 years ago, and I feel like the industry has kind of embraced it as a new way of doing marketing and PR. So let's just talk about what brand journalism is. It's a pretty simple concept. It's discovering and creating content from within your brand, right? So we need to figure out what are these stories within our healthcare brands. It's not just news style content. So it's not like, oh, I'm gonna just write something that looks like a news story. It actually has to be newsworthy to your audience. And so what I mean by that is it's not that it has to be like this breaking news that's going to be on the front page of the newspaper. It just has to be something that applies to whatever target audience you are trying to reach. So think about, what does my audience care about? Those are the stories that I want to be writing about and telling. And although it's called brand journalism, it actually has very little branding. So we kind of need to sort of flip what's maybe been known more traditionally in advertising and marketing, and not put the brand, as the headline, or in the first paragraph of the content that you're writing. So we need to think about maybe being a little more subtle in branding. This does sometimes make people in the C-suite a little bit nervous, but it really, if you can nail it and do it with very subtle branding, you're going to be a lot more successful. So the brand journalism approach is pretty simple. So brand journalists, they identify stories, they create content, and then they secure exposure for experts or products. So as a brand journalist, you're trying to figure out, what are these great stories inside my institution? How do I tell them? And the most important thing is, now how do I get people to see them? Because it's not enough just to tell stories, you have to get eyeballs for it. And that's the really difficult part sometimes. So I'm hoping that I can give you guys some tips that you can take back with you. The very first tip, so I just want you to keep this in mind as you are watching this presentation, stop writing so many press releases and start telling actual stories. Okay, so I'm not saying never to write a press release again, because we will need press releases, but you really need to start thinking about, instead of formatting as a press release and what is this quote and what's the contact info, what's the actual story? And if I was sitting in a newsroom, if I was the reporter that I might have to pitch this story to, how would I do that story? And that's how I want you guys to start thinking about it. So this is just a quick example of brand journalism, maybe for those of you who it might be a newer concept. So Coca-Cola is a brand. It's not a healthcare brand, but I think it's just a big brand that does a great job with brand journalism. So as you can see on the left side, that is their Coca-Cola Journey site, and that's their brand journalism site. And what they do is they focus on lifestyle type of content. The top 10 must-have spring picnic essentials. And then on the right side, that is the actual corporate Coca-Cola website, and that is not brand journalism. That's more about products and services. So that's just to kind of give you an idea of the concept. And then I think out of all the healthcare brands, I think Cleveland Clinic does an amazing job with content, with brand journalism. They have a site called Health Essentials, and you can see it on the left side of the page. It used to be called Health Hub up until about a year ago. They have an internal team that does it. And if you're not following them on social media, I definitely would, and I think it could give you some ideas for your own healthcare institutions. Just great health tips. Anytime anything happens in the news, they always have something out there. I think a really good example is, right now with the death of Prince, like everybody is talking about opioid addiction and what are the tips and what are the signs, and how do you know, what if you're getting prescribed this? And I think all the media is doing it, but if you look at great healthcare brands that are doing brand journalism, they're also talking about those things. So, as far as content, you need to really keep a pulse on what's happening in the news and in pop culture and be talking about that within your own brand. And then as you can see on the other side, that's more the Cleveland Clinic, their normal website. That's where you can find a doctor. That's where you can, figure out, what insurance they take and all those transactional types of things, which are not brand journalism. So now that I've crowned you brand journalists, what do I actually do, right? So a brand journalist creates content, news content on behalf of a brand, and they wear a lot of different hats, which I'm sure that you guys wear lots of different hats, because we all know the world has changed, and all of us, I'm sure in this room, have gotten lots more responsibility beyond maybe what you had just a couple years ago. So a lot of people ask me, what's the difference between a journalist and a brand journalist? Because, a journalist actually works for a news organization. A brand journalist works for a brand or on behalf of a brand. So I think a brand journalist, when I was a reporter, and I'm sure those of you that are, were reporters that are here today, think about when you cover the news as a reporter, you're really covering it for this one audience. You know, if you work for a newspaper, or I happen to work for a television station, it's like, what do the viewers want to hear about? And I know as a reporter, when I was reporting for the morning show, I kind of took a little bit of different spin on things than when I was reporting for the evening news, because you know, you have a little bit of a different audience. Your audience doesn't have as much time in the morning, and you have to kind of be a lot quicker with it. As a brand journalist, there are some kind of subtleties. When we cover stories for hospitals, we might not do it the exact same way that a journalist would. And it doesn't mean it's wrong or, you know, it's not correct. I think it's just, you have to just think about some subtleties. So you need to understand storytelling. You need to kind of be a sales guru to understand what stories to tell. And this is something that almost all of our clients are dealing with. It's so hard to find stories within my institution. Do any of you guys have that problem where you're talking to maybe, you know, your experts or your doctors or people on staff, and they're like, yeah, I don't really have anything going on. So, or this is the best and the worst thing. A doctor will say like, oh yeah, I have a paper coming out in JAMA like at 4 o'clock today. I just thought I'd give you a heads up. Like, that is too late if you're just telling me now, right? Because, you know, we as communicators, we need to plan. So, so as a sales guru, we need to figure out what are the best stories that we should be telling. Most of the hospitals I work with, we take a look at their key product lines, and we try to align stories with those product lines. So I would say, you know, if you're not doing that, definitely figure out, you know, what are the lines that I need to be telling stories for, and then really try to dig into those. You also need to be a PR professional who knows how to get buzz, because like I said, it's not enough to tell the story. You have to get people to see it. You need to subtly be able to brand this story, but you can't hit people over the head with it. And I'll show you some examples in a couple minutes. You know, you need to be like a blogger. You need to understand SEO and new technology and how to get people to see your story. And very, very important, you need to know how to measure results. And the first thing is you need to know, like, what am I supposed to be measuring? So there's so many more things that we need to think about as a brand journalist versus a journalist for an actual station or a media property. So another simple tip, principle of brand journalism, what would a journalist do? So when you are, you know, when you find a great topic within your healthcare organization, the first thing to ask yourself is, all right, well, so, you know, Jenny Smith, who's a reporter, I really respect her, she's a great healthcare reporter, what would she do with this story? And you need to be thinking about how she might cover it, and that's how you need to cover it. Okay, so brand journalism is great for thought leadership. So I wanted to put this example up. This is something that we did for Ohio State, where they had a doctor who had this way to fix damaged knees with implanting cartilage that's grown in the lab. So instead of doing a press release, what we did was an actual guest blog where we wrote it on behalf of the doctor, and we pitched it to US News and World Report, and they used it with his byline. So that's something that you can do. Are any of you guys doing this in your local market, where like maybe with the local newspaper, maybe with the website, you can have your doctors and experts on as experts? So is anyone already doing that? Perfect. I mean, I think it's a great way, and it's sort of a new way that the media is working. And it's you know, when I talked earlier about how they're trying to do less with more, they need more content, you know, for their websites. And we have really great results with like HuffPost and US News and World Report and lots of major outlets. But the key is, you know, you need to turn this column into them so that they have to do very little editing. So as a brand journalist, the first thing you need to understand is, what are their editorial guidelines? And once you get to know these reporters, they're happy to share them with you. You know, maybe first look at some other columns so you can kind of see, and you'll be able to kind of see exactly like how many words it is and how technical it is. We find that some, we work with life science as well too, and theirs are much more scientific, where US News might want it a little bit more consumer friendly. We have a person on staff who is so great at turning really technical stuff into simple to understand consumer language, and I think that's another great, you know, great trait to have today, because it's really, really important. this doctor, Dr. Flanagan, he's great, but like he didn't write this column, you know, someone in communications wrote it for him. So I think if you already don't have someone on staff, or if you're not great with that, look for somebody who kind of has a scientific mind that can really turn things into consumer language. And I think you could have some great results locally, thinking about doing things in a different way. So we didn't ever send a press release to US News. We just kind of sent them like a paragraph saying, hey, here's this topic. We think it could fit into your blog. Here's the doctor. Here's what we'd write. We have this. This was a photograph that we took ourselves and gave to them, and just kind of did everything for them. And once they start working with you and they're like, oh my gosh, you get it. I have to do like so little to this. You'll get more and more results, and they'll start coming to you saying, hey, do you have a doctor who could write a topic on X? And then you're really rolling, when the media is coming to you. So that's what we want to happen. So like I said, we've been doing brand journalism for about 17 years, and we have found just some criteria with brand journalism content. So we have this thing called the Brand Journalizer content criteria, and they're just some things that great brand journalism content has in common. So the first thing that we found is that it focuses on the audience. So instead of content focusing on your institution, you need to flip it so that it focuses on your audience. So it's not about this new technology you have, it's about how this technology helps this person. So it's about the audience. The second thing is to find a voice. I think one of the most important things we've found with doing brand journalism is that you have to have a real person. So finding a voice means a voice of a real person. So you can certainly include one of your experts, but we have found much more, the content, people engage with it more, the media is more interested in it when it has a real person. The third thing is to be credible. So it's great if you're at a research institution and you have statistics that you own and you can kind of be credible by talking about it. But if you don't, and many times even, the institutions we work with, although they might be academic, they don't have it. A great way to be credible is to tie into something bigger. So tie into, if you're doing a breast cancer story, make sure you have the latest statistics. Or if there's some trend, make sure that you're an example of that trend. So that's just another example of really paying attention to what is out there trending and how can you be a part of that conversation. The fourth thing is to keep it simple. I talked about that a second ago. So, you need to, it's not about, talking in medical ease. You need to figure out a simple way to talk about these really complex things that all of our institutions do. Visual, thinking visual, I think it's one of the most important things right now. We rarely distribute any content that doesn't have at least a photo. Many times it has a video. So my company, MediaSource, we are in Columbus. We're split into half of our staff is content creators, so writers, producers, videographers, editors. Half is PR, media relations. So we have the people that make the content and the people that push it out. We feel like it's a really good model because those are kind of the two things that people are wanting right now. So our content creators create it, our media relations team pushes it out. And then the last thing is unbrand your content. And this is something that frankly makes a lot of people really nervous because they're like, well, my boss is never going to pay for me, either my internal staff or to hire someone to make content that doesn't have like our company logo all over it and everything. So I'm not saying to strip everything off of it, but just start thinking about it in a different way. Maybe you're not the headline. Maybe if it's a video, in the first 30 seconds, you don't really hear about the institution. You hear about how the institution's helping someone first, and then you realize that it came from your institution later. So it's not taking everything away, it's really just subtly slipping it in just like a journalist would do. So we'll come back to this a little bit later, but as I show you some examples, just keep this criteria in mind. So I'm going to show you a couple quick case studies. This one is from the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center, and it is a story that we did that actually drove so much engagement that it crashed their website. So I was like, yes, sorry, sorry that happened. But I mean, it was really, no one expected it. It was kind of crazy. So researchers there, they developed this test. It was called the SAGE test, and it could help identify some early indicators of Alzheimer's disease. So it was really a hot consumer topic. And we knew that when we started talking to the hospital, when we have bigger stories, usually, I mean, we like to have a couple months lead time, as we all do in the room when we have big things happening, right? So we knew about it a couple months ahead. So our goal with this was we wanted to drive consumers to the hospital website to download the test. And so that was kind of how we thought about everything. So we look at brand journalism in 4 steps. Content creation, what are we going to create to tell the story? The second thing is outreach strategy. How are we going to get people to see it? Distribution is actually the execution of that. We want them to see it this way. How are we getting it to them? And the fourth thing is analytics. And that's, what are we going to measure? How do we know this is successful? So our content strategy was pretty easy. We wanted to talk to the doctor, obviously, that came up with the test. We needed our real person. Remember the brand journalizer criteria, find a voice. We had to have a real person who either felt she needed to take it, wanted to take it, had already taken it. This woman had taken it. She was part of the study. And then we also knew that we wanted to feature the test itself and let people know how they could find it. So those were the 3 key elements. Our outreach strategy, and this is kind of the model that we use most of the time, especially if the story has, pretty big possibilities. Earned media, and earned media is the news media, so we want to push it out to the news media, and we knew this was a great story, so we knew we wanted to start with national. And then owned media, we knew we needed to create content and also do a push on the company-owned media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, so we had a strategy behind those 2 types of content. For earned media strategy, we really focus on strategic media relations. So we're not as much about, just blasting things out. And, at some point, like after we got all our ducks in a row, we did blast things out. But we really started by calling some of the reporters that we knew nationally saying, hey, this is coming up. This is a pretty big deal. There has never been a test like this before. So we had embargoed the story because it was a journal publication. So we had a couple weeks where we were talking to national media. So things were relationship-based, very customized. We found that kind of works the best. And I think on any level, national, local, regional, I feel like that's probably the best way to do it. Our own media strategy was that, on the far side of the page, this was the landing page that the hospital created for the test. So we created a special page where you could not only download the test, but it had some other links and it had some just general information. And then we created some content that would be pushed out via YouTube, Facebook, Twitter that would kind of point people back to that page. So our way for delivering media content, so all the hospitals that we work with, they all have a newsroom, but in 2009 we created this thing called the Multimedia newsroom because we were finding that, and this was, back in the day when people used to do satellite feeds and used to send out tapes with videos, and we knew that the world was kind of going more digital. Media didn't really use it in 2009. It really took a couple years, till about 2011, that they started downloading. But so we just put all the content up on this special newsroom, but it's really designed to deliver downloadable, high-quality results. Because for those of you who deal with the media, if you do have like a high-quality picture or video, it's hard to email it to them because it'll usually get kicked back to you because it's too big. So what we do when we do a pitch is we'll have a URL for this newsroom and we just send the link to the URL. And so this is like when you scroll down where you can kind of download different elements of it, including high quality stills. And we find a lot of the, even the national newspapers will use the exact captions we put with the stills. So it's just kind of another example of the more you can make it really easy for the media on any level, I think the better results you're gonna have. So one of the national media that we went to first was NBC. And so this was a couple years ago when Dr. Nancy Snyderman was still there and when Brian Williams was still there, so they're both gone now. But so we pitched it to them and it was really amazing because so they ended up, I'm going to show you a clip in a second, they ended up using most of the hospital's content. So you'll see the story and you'll see like the woman that was featured that took the test. It was all the stuff that our producer shot at the hospital. They did want to do their own interview with the doctor, but they just asked if we could just take our crew back over to the hospital. And so we set up again, set our producer there, and then the producer from New York that was with NBC actually asked the questions, and then we FTP'd, digitally got it to NBC. So I'm just gonna show this to you. This is not even the whole story. I like cut a minute out of it. this is just a couple minutes of it, but the thing that I want you to look at is they had the URL of the SAGE test up on screen for like 30 seconds, which is an eternity in, you know, national television broadcast, which is probably part of the reason why the website crashed, but I'll show you a couple minutes of this.
Our health meeting tonight has to do with a big concern in a nation with an aging population. The number of people who spend a part of every day wondering if their memory is failing them and whether it could be a sign of something more serious. Tonight there is a new at-home test to help keep track of mental sharpness. We get our report from our chief medical editor, Dr. Nancy Snyder.
80-year-old retired nurse Emily Shorenstein loves to travel and spend time with family. She's been all over the world. Her latest adventure is part of her longtime passion for learning. She's participating in a study about mild cognitive impairment, those small changes in the brain that might ultimately lead to Alzheimer's disease.
If I was showing the early signs that they thought they could treat, then they would let me know.
She's one of more than 1,000 people over the age of 50 who took one of several short exams developed by researchers at Ohio State University's Wexner Medical Center. They're showing some promise at identifying cognitive issues early, and it's a tool, researchers say, for anyone concerned about their own or a loved one's memory loss.
They can do it on their own. It doesn't take doctors' time, staff time. It can be done virtually anywhere.
The so-called SAGE test is free and available online for download. Anyone with a computer can access it at sagetest.osu.edu. Once printed, the simple 4-page exam measures drawing skills, problem-solving, language, and more. The answers are also online, so anyone can check scores and track progress. Researchers say if you're 62 or older, taking the test once a year could be a good way to track any decline. Doctors caution, however, that the test is just one way to identify the problem.
It just says, hey, maybe my thinking is not as good as it used to be. And it starts the conversation with your physician.
So that just gives you an example of, you know, brand journalism on national media. I think, you know, the thing that applies to you is if you do the story yourself, you can show the media how to do it. Our story that we did on behalf of the hospital looked very, very similar to that, and the NBC producer had access to that. So, you know, they didn't even do their interview with the doctor until like 11 a.m. the day the story was going to air, so they didn't really have a ton of time to work on it. So again, like that legwork that you can do as a communicator for the healthcare brand can really help you in the end. So this is what happened after the NBC segment aired. About 7 o'clock, the website traffic spiked on the hospital's website. At 9 o'clock, it crashed. And that was pretty crazy. And then as it aired again on the West Coast, it crashed again. So the next morning, more outlets were picking up the story, and that's kind of when we sort of went out more widely with everyone with the story, with the, and we sent the link that I showed you on the other page. They had to do a self-induced outage of the website just to kind of prepare it for more traffic. And it was more visits in a single day than like any other time for the hospital. So it just kind of shows you, like, with the right content done the right way and sort of pushed out in the most strategic way, you can really make a huge difference. So I want to show you also something else we learned, because I think the top sites that were referring back to the hospital. So again, this is like the power of, you know, we are making content for the hospital's website, their Twitter, their Facebook, but also for the news media, the earned media. I mean, I really think if you can get the earned media interested in your story, it can just drive so much traffic back. So it wasn't surprising to us. NBC News, CBS, Huffington Post, the next several, like 10 TV and Cleveland.com, those were big media within the state of Ohio. So again, that wasn't surprising to us. Facebook, The Dispatch, that's the Columbus newspaper. What was really surprising is that Alzheimer'sReadingRoom.com was one of the top drivers. So this really has kind of changed our thinking when we've worked on campaigns, and I just wanted to share this advice with you. Don't forget about the niche websites. So whatever, you know, disease or whatever condition you're dealing with, go to where those patients and the caregivers of those patients are looking for information, because we severely underestimated, you know, some of these Alzheimer's sites and caregiver sites, how that would really drive traffic. And, again, brand journalism is about targeting your audience. And, a big part of the audience for Alzheimer's would be the caregivers, the people that are caregiving for people who have Alzheimer's or thinking, hey, I think my mom or dad, like they're showing some signs, how do I know? People that are looking for information. So we've seen this with a couple stories that we've done, not just this one, where we have targeted a few, patient groups, and maybe it's on social media or maybe it's just kind of a niche website, but it can make a big, big difference. So do not forget about those niche websites. So this was kind of the end result of the full campaign. So to date, and this was about a year and a half ago, they've had about 1.5 million downloads of the test and about as many visits to the website. We had more than 500 media hits and more than 665 million in audience. So it was a huge campaign. And it's, kind of the story that keeps on giving, because now, there's follow-ups to the story, and the hospital is actually still getting calls about it. So, when you have something really big, definitely, amplify it as much as you can.
When did you do this?
This was, I think, in probably mid-2014. So it was about a year and a half ago. So I want to show you a quick example, similar how brand journalism, so that, we got consumers to do something. We wanted them to download the test. Now, did that result in more business for the hospital? Their, neuro, there is such a waiting list. So I'm sure that a lot of you deal with this. Like, there are product lines you have to promote, but there's a waiting list, but you still need to promote it because of reputation, right? But then there are other product lines you need to promote to try to drive volume. So this was something for Orlando Health. They're a hospital out of Orlando, Florida. They have cancer. They're the ones that have Arnold Palmer Hospital for Children. And they wanted to showcase their practice for treating lymphedema. And they were one of the only places in the country that had a specific treatment. So our goal with this was to more try to increase awareness and try to drive some business. So we kind of did the same thing, except, and this is just kind of a different way of thinking. So think about when you're asked to promote something within your healthcare brand and you feel like just promoting it alone just seems kind of pitchy and, promotable. So what we decided to do was, hey, we think this is great, but let's focus on medical tourism. Let's focus on, like, you guys are so specialized at this that people are actually flying from all over the country, taking a vacation while they're in Orlando and getting treatment. So that was kind of our hook to, like, tie into something, a national trend. So maybe that's something that you can use when you have sort of something that seems super promotable. Think about a trend that you may be able to tie into. So we went through the same 4 steps: content, outreach, distribution, and analytics. We had our expert, and then we had a real person who, actually came to Orlando from another city. So I'm going to just show you. This is different. The NBC story was done by NBC. This is the story that was done by us, done by the hospital. And, as you can see, it looks and feels like a news story, and much of the news coverage looked very similar to this.
It's the second time this year that Amy Caterina has made the trip from California to Orlando. She and her kids have taken in the typical tourist attractions, but Amy and her sister see the Sunshine State in a different light.
You come here and you just go to Disney and Orlando and SeaWorld and Legoland and all those great fun places with your kids. You don't really get an appreciation for the beauty of Florida. It's gorgeous.
But beyond warm, sunny days by the pool, Amy is actually in Orlando for another reason. After surviving cancer, Amy developed lymphedema in her right leg. So like a growing number of patients, she's come here for treatment. Doctors at UF Health Cancer Center at Orlando Health are among only a few in the country who do this surgery: transplant healthy lymph nodes from one part of the body to another, which is eliminate painful swelling in other patients similar to Amy. They're basically on track and all that. So as the number of patients climbed up, Amy learned about the procedure online and made the 2,500-mile trip from San Diego, something Dr. Richard Klein is seeing more often. 1 in 4 patients are coming out from out of state into the consultation and receiving But the growing trend known as the medical tourism in the state of Florida is spending $5 million to market the asset. And several large companies have cut deals with hospitals to treat their employees, even if they're out of state. An approach to care that makes perfect sense to patients like Amy.
We want to make sure we're doing something that's a little unusual to go to someone who's really well-trained and well-versed.
At UF Health Cancer Center at Orlando Health, this is Clark Powell reporting.
So, when watching that, you could see that Orlando Health, like the hospital, wasn't even mentioned until like at least 30 seconds in, and that was intentional. So we didn't start with like, there's this treatment and you can get it here. We kind of started by subtly leading into this whole medical tourism topic. So we distributed it the same way. We had a very similar strategy, but here was the outcome. So there were 7 new surgical consultations scheduled from Orlando Health, many from New York. And what was the really cool thing about this is there's a reporter named Dr. Max Gomez out of New York. And shortly after he did this story, their phone started ringing in Orlando. And so the communications person was emailing us saying like, oh my gosh, this must have just aired somewhere. And our tracking person was able to say, yeah, like 10 minutes ago, it just aired on WCBS TV. So that, it's great when you can kind of have methods set up where you can track how something that we're doing as communicators is really helping to drive business. How many of you guys are being challenged to show how your work in marketing and communications and PR is driving business, right? So yeah, I think all of us are. I feel like that's the way that it's going. And I think it's easier to do it. I think there's no like magic thing that's gonna help us all. I wish someone like had something that we could just, like an app that would be like, show the power of what you do to your boss, but it doesn't exist yet. So, I mean, I think just kind of, setting things up in advance, talking to people to kind of make sure they know what you're doing. It was great. We had the communication between the PR team in Orlando and the doctor. That was amazing. So like I said, WCBS in New York, it was also got great online coverage which then linked back to the hospital site. So that's just one example of how it drives business. So, you're sitting there like, okay, you just showed me these 2 like really big national things and I'm from a rural hospital. Like, tell me some things I can do that aren't gonna cost a ton of money that I can do. So here's some things I think you can change without spending money. Your approach, your structure, your thinking, where you find content, how you distribute it, and how you measure storytelling. So I'm just gonna walk you through each of these things and hopefully give you some take-home tips that you can use and sort of just change the way you're thinking. So I talked about this earlier, your approach, stop writing so many press releases and start telling stories. So start thinking about what are these stories and how am I gonna tell them as a brand journalist? And so the second thing, change your structure. So I'm not saying that you have to like get a whole new staff or get more staff, although wouldn't that be awesome, right? If you could just get like, just a couple more people to help with all this work that you have. But just start operating like a newsroom or hold newsroom style assignment meetings. So we meet every morning, our team does, and we have a person who's in charge of just kind of bringing to that meeting, like, what is the top health news today? What's happening? What's trending? What can we insert our experts into the national conversation? And then we even have a call, like with UCLA, for example, since they're on the West Coast, their head communications person, we have a call with her, and it's 7 a.m. her time, 10 a.m. our time, talking about the trending news, and then she connects us directly with different doctors who might need to talk about things. So when we all know this, when you see experts in the news, it's not really just because the media has them on speed dial, it's because some communications person is out there putting them in front of the media. So I think that's something you can do, is watch these trending topics every morning and see how you can insert your own experts into that conversation. It might be writing a blog for your own website, and I think that's a great way. And then you can also use that blog to then pitch the expert to the media, and we've had a lot of success doing that as well. So, asking what's newsworthy and applying that news to your brand and to your expert. Who do I have that can talk about this thing that's happening today? Thinking like a beat reporter. So like I talked about this earlier, we kind of look at, most of the hospitals internally look at their beats and product lines, which I'm sure many of you do, where, we have a person, we've actually split our teams. We have a person who is the neuro beat. So for all of our hospitals, she's kind of in charge of looking at what's happening in neuro news and making sure that experts at the hospitals, like if they can talk on it or if we have anything that ties to it, how we're going to get out there. So we divide beats into categories, we split them among the team. I think the best thing to do as a beat reporter, and I was the crime reporter, kind of different than the opposite of the health reporter. I was a crime reporter when I worked in news, but the thing that helped me was really just like stopping by the police station. So before I ever went to my television station every day, I stopped by the police station with really no other goal, just to kind of see what was going on and if I could learn something, you know, that maybe the other media in town didn't know. And it does help to establish those relationships. So I think one of the hardest things is we're really, really busy, and the experts within our healthcare organizations are really, really busy, so it's hard to connect. But if you can just take that time to connect, or if you can assign someone on your team to connect, it will make a huge difference, because sometimes what they think is like not a big deal could be this major campaign that you find out this little nugget and it develops into some huge campaign for your organization. So, relationships, and I know, like I said, we don't have time to talk to everyone, but think about, maybe just start it with your most important product line. What is the thing that you are charged with driving business for, driving coverage for, and just try to work that beat. Start with one beat and see how that works. And I think another thing is to share good outcomes resulting from the content. So like, for instance, the fact that Orlando Health and the person inside this doctor's office, they were sharing, like, we just got this call from New York, or we're going to do a surgery on this patient that just, called us from Pennsylvania. The more you can share those successes, now the next time, not only will that doctor's staff come back to you with info, you can go to someone else in your organization and say, hey, do you know what? I drove 5 surgeries for Dr. James, and if you guys would just, work with me and let me know what you have going on, I can maybe do the same for you. So word spreads, when your department does great things, and then other people are like, what about me? What about me? So make sure you're sharing that information. So the next thing you can change is how to find content. And so one thing I would encourage you to do, if you're not already, is creating an editorial calendar. A lot of you already have those, so where you're looking at, what topics are we going to be covering on our social media? What topics do we want to be maybe pushing out to the news media? A really great way, if you do not have an editorial calendar, is to look on media outlet sites. So say you're at a children's hospital, look at Parents Magazine. Just download their editorial calendar. It's right there. Or if you're at just an adult hospital, Prevention Magazine, download their editorial calendar. That just kind of tells you the general health topics that they're going to be covering. And then you can kind of apply those to your brand. So I think that's a great place to start if you don't have one. Build your editorial calendar around your audience's lifestyle. So I think sometimes as communicators, marketers, PR people, we build things around when we have products coming out, or when this surgery is being done. We need to be thinking about our audience. When are kids going to be getting out of school and getting injured in pools? When is back to school? When do they need to get vaccinated? When are the holidays coming and everyone's stressed out and getting sick? What about the flu in January? So editorial calendars really need to focus less on what's happening in your institution and instead what is happening with your audience. You need to just kind of review this editorial calendar on a regular basis, weeks in advance, months in advance. We work with a lot of the national magazines like Parenting or Prevention and the Health magazine. So we are looking at topics. I mean, those magazines look at them 6 months in advance. But for a lot of local and a lot of online, you're maybe just looking at a week in advance. And you guys know with local, sometimes it's like day of, right? So you just need to keep looking at it. And then always be prepared to add in breaking news. And what I talked about earlier with Prince, really none of our hospitals were talking that much about opioids. Now everyone's talking about it. So you just need to think about what's happening, what's trending, and insert those topics into your editorial mix. You can also change how you distribute content. So if your organization is in silos, where it's like, well, I'm the person who deals with news media, and then there's this whole other department that does digital, and that's not me. and I'm the person who does ads and they're way over there, I would just really encourage you to try to get people working together. Maybe if it's even just, once a month getting together and everyone sharing their editorial calendars or, what stories they have. Because I think if you really integrate how you are looking at content and distributing it, you're going to get a lot more out of it. And also changing how you measure storytelling. So I think the most important thing, a lot of people are like, well, what services do you use? And, and all that. I think, forget about all that. What do you need to be measuring? What does your boss want to know? Do they care how many Facebook likes you have? Do they want you to reach a certain number of media hits? Are they asking you to drive business? So, I think the more you can sort of get into the C-suite's head, what's important to them, what are they impressed by, and then you need to align your measurement with that. Like I said, more and more they still want us to measure the old way. They still want to know like number of hits and what's the audience and engagement and all of that. But what they really want to know is, how are you affecting my bottom line? How are you driving business to my healthcare institution? So that's what we're really trying to focus on at this point. So I talked earlier about the brand journalizer content criteria, and like I said, you guys have this on your flash drive. So I hope that you can kind of think about this when you are looking at stories within your institutions, but it's a lot to remember. So we wrote a song and did a video about it, which I'm going to show you now, and I'm pretty sure that this is the debut here in Springfield of the brand journalizer song. So this is exciting.
Be a brand journalist, here's how you do it. The brand journalizer, it's your toolkit. You gotta focus on the audience, the people you're talking to. Find the voice and use it, that's what you gotta do. You have to be credible, that's a must. That's the way that you build trust. Just keep it simple, don't make it absurd. Don't you know a picture's worth 1,000 words? Think with your eyes. Keep it visual and unbrand your content. It's better to be general. Brand journalizer, brand journalizer, brand journalizer, brand journalizer. Follow these tips and you'll be wise. It's all you need to brand journalize.
Okay, do you remember it now? All right. So these are all the tips that I have for you. What questions do you guys have for me? Yes?
This might be kind of a low-level question, so I apologize.
There's no such thing as a dumb question. Here, I'll keep-
So I have always, I'm new to my role,
Yeah.
and I've always had the ability to have an agency to do the distribution for me. I no longer have that. So that's, I think, the piece that I'm dropping the ball on the most is, I have a BCC, my media list, it's not personalized, and I'm not even really sure, I have a lot of press releases and a lot of, I'm trying to get more stories in, but I don't have as many yet. But some days I'll have like 3 press releases that they want all to go out on the same day, and it just seems like too much to go to the media. So do you have recommendations for how to really, kind of some tips for when, how often, when you have a press release that needs to go to a lot of people, should I send individual emails to all the people, or kind of some more details on that?
So I assume, would all the releases kind of be going to the same people?
Yeah.
Right? So a couple of things. So I think the problem that you have is not a unique problem. Because we've recently had a problem that sort of like content is backed up. You have a lull and then there's a lot of content. So I feel like there are 2 things that you can do. Number one is sometimes we will combine. So like, for instance, we might send stories out that have a similar theme. Like, I know we're looking at trying to send some summer type of stories. We have something about your kids and screen time. I think we have something about maybe keeping your child safe, swimming. We have like 3 or 4 that we're kind of sending all in one distribution. And then the other thing is, trying to expand your contacts. So sometimes we will, like if we have 3 or 4 things, we'll figure out like, okay, so this probably shouldn't go to the top tier. Like we don't think this is USA Today and NBC News. We think this might be something more regional, or this might just be a wire service. And I think one thing that we do with media in general is if you have something really big, I would start at the top and I wouldn't even blast it out. Like start with some reporter that maybe might be able to get it 3 places. You know, we work a lot in Ohio, and I'm sure they have this in Illinois. Like we'll work with Gannett, Ohio. So it's a, newspaper, television reporter that works for Gannett. And so if we have something big, we're like, let's go to the Gannett, Ohio guy because he's going to get it all over the state. So I would say when you have something really big, go to the wire service, go to the person who can kind of syndicate it for you. Does that help?
Yeah.
Good. Hi. All the way.
I was just going to add to what you said.
Yeah.
You were saying before about the difference when people use news releases in terms of telling the story versus doing a news release.
Yeah.
And in that particular situation, sometimes as a news releases for maybe a local newspaper, you just want them to print, you just want them to pick them up,
Yeah.
pick it up the way that you wrote it, because maybe they don't have much of a staff and they're just going to pick it up. But maybe depending on what those news releases are, there might be something that actually is a larger story. And so when we look at news releases, it's a matter of sometimes a news release is to actually pitch a larger story, not just to get the coverage.
Right, for sure. That's a great point. Anybody else have questions or any other thoughts or advice on that? Okay. All right, well, thank you. You guys have been great. Like I said, everything is on that flash drive and my info's on there. So if you have any questions, anything, feel free to reach out. Should I just give this to you?
Yep. Thank you, Lisa. We really appreciate you coming today.
Thanks.
And on behalf of the Ishikara here.